Welcome to WW2 Heroic Tales, where true stories of courage, sacrifice, and extraordinary heroism come alive from the darkest days of World War II. Join us as we uncover the untold moments that shaped history. By 1943, the skies over occupied Europe were a sprawling, merciless battlefield. This was the domain of the United States 8th Air Force, an aerial armada tasked with a mission of unprecedented scale and danger. The strategic daylight bombing of Nazi Germany. The theory was simple, but its execution was brutal. By striking at the industrial heart of the Third Reich, its factories, rail lines, and oil refineries, the Allies hoped to cripple Germany's ability to wage war. The primary instrument for this perilous task was the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress, a four-engine heavy bomber that bristled with 1350 caliber machine guns. It was a technological marvel designed to fly high and defend itself in massive, layered formations. But for all its defensive armament, it was far from invulnerable. The odds were grim. An airman's tour of duty was initially set at 25 missions, a number that seemed impossibly distant. Statistically, a crewman had only a 1 in 4 chance of completing it. The 8th Air Force would suffer more combat casualties than the entire U.S. Marine Corps in the Pacific. Every mission was a flight into a hornet's nest of German anti-aircraft fire, known as flak, and relentless attacks from the Luftwaffe's seasoned fighter pilots. The air was a three-dimensional chess board of death, where contrails from hundreds of bombers wove paths through black puffs of exploding shells. For the 10-man crews inside these aluminum fortresses, it was a test of endurance, skill, and sheer will against the freezing cold, oxygen deprivation, and the constant, gnawing fear of a sudden, violent end thousands of feet above enemy soil. This was the world that awaited thousands of young American men, a world where survival was measured one mission at a time. In the midst of this global conflict, a young man named Ralph Goldsticker from St. Louis, Missouri, answered the call to serve. Like many of his generation, he dreamed of becoming a pilot, of soaring through the clouds and engaging the enemy in the cockpit of a fighter. He entered the Army Air Forces with high hopes, ready to take on the rigorous training that would earn him his wings. However, fate had a different path for him. Despite his determination, Goldsticker washed out of pilot training, a deeply disappointing setback that could have ended his aviation career. But he refused to be grounded. If he couldn't fly the plane, he would find another way to take the fight to the enemy from the air. He chose to retrain for two of the most mentally demanding roles on a bomber crew, Bombardier and Navigator. This decision would place him not in the relative safety of the pilot's seat, but at the very tip of the spear. The training was intense, a whirlwind of mathematics, celestial navigation, bomb ballistics, and aircraft identification. As a navigator, he would be responsible for guiding the bomber across hundreds of miles of hostile territory with precision. As a bombardier, the success of the entire multi-million-dollar aircraft and its 10-man crew would rest on his shoulders for a few critical moments over the target. He mastered the complexities of the Norden bombsight, a top-secret analog computer that was, in theory, capable of placing a bomb inside a pickle barrel from 20,000 feet. Ralph Goldsticker was no longer a failed pilot. He was a highly trained specialist, a key component in America's aerial war machine, heading for the lethal skies of Europe. He had found his place, unaware that it was the most exposed and dangerous seat on the entire aircraft. The Bombardier's station on a B-17 was a place of breathtaking views and terrifying vulnerability. Encased in a plexiglass nose cone, the Bombardier and navigator sat ahead of the pilots, with nothing but a thin sheet of transparent plastic separating them from the hostile sky. Ralph Goldsticker called this his office. At an operational altitude of over 25,000 feet, the outside temperature plunged to 50 degrees below zero. The air was too thin to support life, making oxygen masks a constant necessity. The crewmen wore electrically heated suits to ward off debilitating frostbite, but the cold was a persistent, seeping enemy that never relented. From this glass cage, Goldsticker witnessed the war in a way few others could. He saw the vast checkerboard of the European landscape unfold beneath him, and he saw the enemy approach with lethal clarity. His primary tool was the legendary Norden bombsight. Protected by a canvas cover and equipped with its own self-destruct charge to prevent it from falling into enemy hands, the Norden was a marvel of mechanical engineering. Peering through its eyepiece, Goldsticker had to precisely align crosshairs on the target miles below, accounting for wind speed, altitude, and the aircraft's velocity. For the final bomb run, he would take control of the aircraft from the pilots, using the bombsight's autopilot feature to make minute adjustments. These were the most tension-filled moments of any mission. The bomber had to fly straight and level, foregoing any evasive maneuvers, making it a perfect, predictable target for the German gunners on the ground. His first missions were a baptism by fire. The sky, once an empty blue expanse, would suddenly erupt into a field of black puffs as flak shells burst around the formation, each one a potential death blow. The percussive thump of shrapnel tearing through the aluminum skin of the aircraft became a horrifyingly familiar sound. This was Ralph Goldsticker's reality, a fragile bubble of life in a storm of steel. The strategic bombing campaign was a relentless war of attrition fought 5 miles above the earth. The term Fortress Europe was not just propaganda. It described a continent defended by one of the most sophisticated and deadly air defense systems ever created. For Goldsticker and the crews of the 8th Air Force, every mission into Germany was a flight deep into enemy territory, a gauntlet that began the moment they crossed the coast. The B-17s flew in meticulously planned combat box formations. These were immense, staggered arrangements of bombers designed to provide overlapping fields of fire from their hundreds of machine guns. A single combat box could unleash a storm of lead that, in theory, would deter enemy fighters. But the Luftwaffe pilots were skilled, aggressive, and fighting to defend their homeland. They developed tactics specifically to break these formations. Their Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s, often armed with heavy cannons, would swarm the bomber streams. A favored and terrifying tactic was the head-on attack. Fighters would fly directly at the bombers, cannons and machine guns blazing, in a deadly game of chicken. This pass gave the B-17's gunners only a few seconds to react, and it targeted the most vulnerable area, the cockpit and the bombardier's glass nose. The sound inside the bomber was a deafening cacophony. The roar of the four Wright Cyclone engines was constant, overlaid by the crackle of the intercom, the sharp, rhythmic hammering of the 50-caliber guns, and the terrifying shriek of cannon shells striking the fuselage. The air would fill with the smell of cordite and ozone. Goldsticker, from his forward position, had a front-row seat to the carnage, watching as friendly bombers, crippled by enemy fire, would peel away from the formation, trailing smoke and flame, their crews desperately trying to bail out before the inevitable explosion. The targets were the arteries of the Nazi war effort, the ball-bearing plants at Schweinfurt, the aircraft factories in Regensburg, the rail hubs of Munich and Berlin. Reaching them and returning was a monumental challenge of survival. Among the 35 missions Ralph Goldsticker flew, one stood out as a particularly stark reminder of the razor's edge between life and death. A raid on the critical rail yards of Munich. The mission profile was typical, a high-altitude approach deep into southern Germany, where the air defenses were known to be formidable. Climbing to their bombing altitude of 27,000 feet, the crew settled into the familiar, freezing routine. The air grew thin, the world outside the plexiglass a deep crystalline blue. Then, as they approached the initial point, the moment where the bomb run began, the sky ahead transformed. The German flak batteries on the ground, directed by radar, had found their range. The serene blue was suddenly pockmarked with greasy black smudges, each one an 88mm shell detonating with violent force. The B-17 formation pressed on, flying directly into the heart of the barrage. Without warning, Goldsticker's bomber was rocked by a tremendous explosion. It was not the familiar rattle of distant bursts, but a direct, visceral impact that felt as if the plane had been struck by a giant's hammer. The entire airframe groaned and shuddered violently, throwing the crew against their stations. Alarm bells screamed through the intercom. The pilot's voice, strained but steady, cut through the chaos, reporting that they had taken a direct hit. 2 of the 4 engines on the right wing were gone. The propellers were windmilling uselessly, and the wing itself was a mangled wreck of torn metal and severed fuel lines. The aircraft began to yaw heavily, struggling to maintain altitude. In an instant, they had gone from being part of a powerful armada to a crippled straggler. Goldsticker's training kicked in. While the pilots fought the controls, his job was to assess the situation, prepare for a potential bailout, and, if possible, still complete his primary task. The target was looming. The fate of his crew and the success of their mission hung precariously in the balance amidst a sky filled with fire and steel. With 2 engines dead and a third sputtering, their B-17 was mortally wounded. It could no longer keep up with the speed or altitude of the main formation. Slowly, agonizingly, they began to fall behind, losing the protective cover of the combat box's interlocking firepower. A crippled bomber flying alone was a prime target, an invitation for any nearby Luftwaffe fighters to close in for an easy kill. The journey home was a desperate race against time, physics, and the enemy. The pilots, displaying incredible skill and strength, wrestled with the controls. They had to constantly compensate for the asymmetric thrust from the remaining engines, which tried to force the plane into a deadly spin. Inside the fuselage, the crew worked as a seamless team. The engineer frantically rerouted fuel and managed power to the struggling engines. The gunners scanned the skies, their eyes peeled for the glint of an approaching fighter, knowing that a single, well-placed burst of cannon fire could finish them off. Goldsticker, his primary bombing task complete, assisted the navigator, plotting the most direct course back to Allied territory, a line that stretched for hundreds of miles over hostile land. Every minute felt like an hour. The rhythmic drone of the engines was gone, replaced by the ragged, unhealthy sound of the two overworked power plants and the shriek of wind tearing through the holes in the wing. They jettisoned everything not essential for survival: machine guns, ammunition, equipment, to lighten the load and claw for every precious foot of altitude. The tension was palpable, a shared, unspoken fear that the battered wings might simply tear away, or that another engine would fail, sealing their fate. But the B-17 lived up to its reputation for toughness. It held together. After an eternity of suspense, the crew spotted the welcome sight of the English Channel. They had made it. The flight back was a testament not just to the rugged design of the bomber, but to the cool-headed professionalism and unbreakable trust of the 10 men who refused to give up, coaxing their shattered machine all the way home. June 6, 1944. D-Day. The largest amphibious invasion in history was underway. While tens of thousands of soldiers stormed the beaches of Normandy, a parallel battle raged in the skies above. For most bomber crews, participating in this momentous day would be the single most important mission of their careers. For Ralph Goldsticker, it was an event he would experience twice in the span of a single day. His first mission began in the dark, pre-dawn hours. His B-17, part of a massive force of over 1,000 heavy bombers, took off from England with a specific, crucial objective: to soften up the formidable German coastal defenses. As they approached the French coast, the darkness below was pricked by the flashes of naval bombardment. Looking down, Goldsticker witnessed a sight that few have ever seen. The immense Allied invasion fleet spread across the Channel, a city of ships poised to change the course of the war. His target was a heavily fortified gun emplacement overlooking the landing zones. Flying low through thick cloud cover and intense anti-aircraft fire, his task was to place his bombs with pinpoint accuracy to neutralize the threat to the landing troops just moments before they hit the beaches. After returning to base, refueling and rearming, there was no rest. A second call came. Goldsticker and his crew were to fly again, this time deeper into France. The objective of this afternoon mission was to sever the arteries that could feed German reinforcements into the Normandy battlefield. Their targets were strategic rail junctions and bridges. The Allies needed to isolate the beachhead, to prevent German panzer divisions from counterattacking and driving the invasion back into the sea. This second flight was just as perilous as the first. The German defenses, now fully alerted, threw everything they had at the bomber streams. For Goldsticker, flying 2 full combat missions on the most significant day of the war was an extraordinary feat of endurance and courage, a direct contribution to the success of Operation Overlord and the liberation of Europe. Surviving 35 combat missions was not just a matter of dodging flak and fighters. It was a profound psychological battle. The cumulative stress on the air crews was immense, a burden that few on the ground could ever comprehend. Every mission started with the early morning briefing, the dread-filled moment when the target was revealed on the map, often a heavily defended city deep inside Germany known as a hot target. The crews would then go through their pre-flight rituals, checking gear, donning their heavy flight suits, many clutching good luck charms or saying a quiet prayer. Superstition was rampant. Certain flight jackets were considered lucky, while speaking of the future was often taboo. Once airborne, the tension would mount for hours during the flight to the target. Then came minutes of sheer terror, followed by the long, anxious journey home, counting the parachutes from other planes, listening on the radio for news of which crews had made it back and which had not. The return to base brought only temporary relief. The sight of empty bunks in the barracks was a constant, stark reminder of the mission's cost. The bonds formed between the 10 men of a B-17 crew were incredibly powerful, forged in the crucible of shared danger. They were a self-contained family that lived, flew, and often perished together. The loss of a crew was a devastating blow to the squadron's morale. For men like Goldsticker, who flew again and again, the emotional toll was heavy. They saw friends vanish in a fireball one day and were expected to fly with a replacement crew the next. This relentless exposure to trauma led to a condition known as flak happy, a term used to describe what is now understood as combat stress or PTSD. The constant anxiety, the sleepless nights, the haunting images of falling bombers. It was a hidden cost of the air war. Ralph Goldsticker's survival was a testament to his mental fortitude as much as his skill and luck, an ability to compartmentalize fear and focus on the mission, one flight at a time. In the arithmetic of the air war, every man and machine was part of a grim calculation of risk versus reward. The tour of duty was the ultimate numbers game. When the American daylight bombing campaign began in earnest, a tour was set at 25 missions. The logic was that if a crew could survive 25 trips over enemy territory, they had done their part and earned the right to go home. But as the war intensified and the need for experienced crews grew, the number began to creep upwards, first to 30 missions, and then, for men like Ralph Goldsticker who were deep into their tour, it was raised again to 35. Each increase was a blow to morale, pushing the finish line further away and making the already improbable odds of survival seem even more remote. Completing a tour of 35 missions was an achievement of monumental proportions. It meant that 35 times, Goldsticker and his crew had prepared for a mission, flown for hours into the most heavily defended airspace on the planet, endured the onslaught of flak and fighters, successfully dropped their bombs, and navigated the long, perilous journey home. It meant that 35 times their engines hadn't failed catastrophically. 35 times, a stray flak shard hadn't pierced an oxygen line or a pilot. 35 times they had beaten the odds. The strategic impact of these missions, multiplied across thousands of sorties flown by the 8th Air Force, was decisive. The campaign, though costly in lives and planes, systematically dismantled Germany's industrial capacity. The destruction of aircraft factories hampered the Luftwaffe's ability to defend its skies. The bombing of synthetic oil plants starved the German war machine of fuel, grounding its tanks and planes. Ralph Goldsticker's 35 missions were not just a personal story of survival. They were a tangible contribution to this strategic victory, a key part of the Allied effort that ultimately led to the downfall of the Third Reich. Upon completing his 35th and final mission, Ralph Goldsticker returned to the United States not just as a survivor, but as a highly decorated combat veteran. His incredible record of service and bravery under fire was recognized with a host of prestigious military honors. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, one of America's highest military decorations, for heroism or extraordinary achievement while participating in an aerial flight. This award was a testament to his skill and courage during perilous missions, likely recognizing specific instances of valor, such as the harrowing flight back from Munich. His contributions were also recognized by a key ally. The government of France bestowed upon him the Légion d'honneur, or Legion of Honor, their nation's highest order of merit. This award acknowledged his direct role in the liberation of their country, particularly his vital missions on D-Day, which helped pave the way for the Allied victory in Normandy. In total, he received 8 medals for his service, each one representing a chapter in his story of resilience and dedication. These medals were more than just pieces of metal and ribbon. They were symbols of a promise kept, of a duty fulfilled under the most extreme circumstances imaginable. They represented the countless hours of terror in the freezing nose of a B-17, the memory of fallen comrades, and the unwavering resolve to see the mission through. Ralph Goldsticker's story exemplifies the quiet heroism of an entire generation. He was one of the thousands of young men who sat in the glass nose of a bomber, flew into the heart of the fire, and through skill, luck, and an unbreakable spirit, lived to tell the tale. His legacy is not just in the medals he wore, but in the freedom he fought to secure. A legacy shared by all the brave airmen of the 8th Air Force who flew the unfriendly skies over Europe. Thank you for joining WW2 Heroic Tales. Through the stories of brave souls from World War II, we honor their memory and keep their legacy alive for history and generations to come.